Today's lesson is 2.7.
Interpreting the remainder. The essential question is, when solving a division problem, when do you write the remainder as a fraction? Okay, so you got to look at the remainder and find out what you're going to be doing with it. Unlocking the problem. Okay, Scott and his family want to take a trail that is 1,365 miles long. They will hike equal parts of the trail on 12 different hiking trips. How many miles will Scott's family hike on each trip? Okay, so it says circle the dividend you will use to solve the division problem. So I'm going to circle the dividend that I'm going to use to solve the division problem, which is 1,365. Then it tells me underline the divisor you will use to solve the division problem. So I'm going to underline the 12. Okay? So then it asks, when you solve a division problem with a remainder, the way you interpret the remainder depends on the situation and the question. Sometimes you need to use both the quotient and the remainder. You can do that by writing the remainder as a fraction. Okay? So, one way. Write the remainder as a fraction. First, divide to find the quotient and the remainder. Then, decide how to use the quotient and the remainder to answer the question. So, I'm going to divide 1,365 by 12. So, the blank represents the number of trips Scott and his family plan to take. So, how many trips is he going to take? He's going to take 12 trips. And remember, I underlined the divisor, so this is going to be my divisor. So it says divisor. Okay. The blank represents the whole number, part of the group of miles that Scott and his family will hike on each trip. Okay. So this is how many miles they're going to hike. So this is my answer. This is my quotient. Okay. Okay. All right. Next. The blank represents the number of miles left over. So that's going to be my remainder, because that's how many miles are left over is going to be my remainder. Oh, that didn't come out very good. Sorry about that. Okay, the remainder represents 9 miles, which can also be divided into 12 parts. So let's solve this out. So we've got 12 going into 1,365. Well, 12 can't go into 1, but it can go into 13. 12 goes into 13 one time. 1 times 12 is 12. I'm going to subtract, and I get left with 1. Then I'm going to make sure that I bring down my 6. Okay? So now I have 12 going into 16. That's going to go in 1 time. 1 times 12 is 12. I'm going to subtract, and I'm going to get 4 left over. And now I'm going to bring down my 5. So now I have 12 going into 45. And so you're going to try, say 12 times, you could even say 12 times 4. 12 times 4 is 8, and that's 4, that's 48, so that's going to be too much. So we have to do 12 times 3. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 1 is 3, so I'm going to have 36. I'm going to subtract. I can't take 5 from 6. I'm going to make that be 15, make that be 3. 6 from 15 is going to be 9. Okay, oh, I forgot to put my 3 up here. So I have 113 with a remainder of 9. So the remainder represents the 9 miles, which can also be divided into 12 parts or written as a fraction. Okay, so if I'm going to do that, let me clear the board here.
Hi.
Okay, so we're going to look at the remainder. The remainder is 9, right? And what does that remainder actually represent? Well, it represents the 9 miles, right? And it can also divide it into 12 equal parts. So they're going to travel 113 miles, and we have these 9 miles left over coming out of 12. So the remainder is going to be 9 over 12, because we're going to write it as a fraction. So the quotient is going to be, and we have to write it in its lowest form. We know that what number goes into 9 and goes into 12 at the same time? Well, 3, right? So 3 goes into 9 3 times, and 3 goes into 12 4 times. So the lowest fraction that we can write, or the simplest form, is going to be 3/4. So Scott and his family are going to hike 113 miles and 3/4. Okay, so they're going to hike 113 and 3/4 miles. So when we're interpreting this remainder, we need it to be a fraction, right? 9/12, and then we're reducing it to 3/4. Okay, another way. Use only the quotient. The segment of the Appalachian Trail that runs through Pennsylvania is 232 miles long. Scott and his family want to hike 9 miles each day on the trail. How many days will they hike exactly 9 miles? So that means if we have any remainder, we're not going to need it because they just want the exactly 9 miles. They don't want a remainder. Okay, so first we're going to divide to find the quotient and what the remainder is. So let's do that. 9 can't go in. 9 can't go into 2, but it can go into 23. Okay, 9 goes into 23 2 times, because 9 times 2 is 18. I'm going to subtract. I can't take 8 from 3, so I'm going to make it be 13, and this is going to be 1. 13 minus 8 is 5, and then I'm going to have to bring down my 2. Remember, I'm going to bring down my 2. So I'm going to bring my 2 down. So now I have 9 going into 52. And the closest I can get is 5, right? Because 9 times 5 is 45. I'm going to subtract. I can't take 2 from 5, so I'm going to make it be a 12. And that's going to end up being a 4, except to borrow from my tens place. 12 minus 5 is 7. So I'm going to have a remainder of 7. But remember, they're asking how many days will they hike exactly 9 miles. So I'm not going to be using my remainder at all in this particular problem. So since the remainder shows that there are not enough miles left over to hike another 9-mile day, we're not going to be using it in the answer. So they hiked exactly 9 miles, 25 of the days, okay? So other ways, it says add 1 to the quotient. What is the, let me go back here. What is the total number of days that Scott will need to hike 232 miles? Well, he did 9 miles in 25 days, but he still had 7 left over, right? So he still has 7 miles. So I can't stop my trip without finishing the trip, so I'm going to need to add another day. Now, it's not going to take me the entire day to do those 7 miles, right? It's only going to take me part of the day. But if I'm going to add another day to it, then now Scott's going to need 26 days to hike the 232 miles, right? Because in 25 days, he hiked part of it, but he still had 7 miles left over, so he's going to need an additional day. This is interpreting the remainder. This is the one thing that my class last year had a really hard time doing. I mean, it is hard because you do have to read the question. You really have to think about what they're asking you. So let's read part B. Part B says, use the remainder as the answer. So if Scott hikes 9 miles each day except the last day, how many miles will he hike on the last day? So the remainder is 7, right? And so that means that on the 7th day, he's going to hike 7 miles on that last day. So for 25 days, he's going to hike 9 miles, right? But then on that last day, he's going to hike the remaining 7 miles. Okay, let's try this. A sporting goods store is going to ship 1,252 sleeping bags. Each shipping carton can hold 8 sleeping bags. How many cartons are needed to ship all of the sleeping bags? So we have 1,252 divided by 8. They've already started the problem. 8 times 1 is 8. I subtract and I get 4, right? Because I can't, 12 minus 8 is 4. Bring down my 5. So now I have 45. 8 goes into 45 how many times? Well, 8 times 5 is 40, right? So then I get 45 minus 40, and I get 5. Okay, and as you can see, they've already brought down that final 2. Now I have 8 going into 52. How many times does 8 go into 52? Well, 8 times 6, 8 times 6 is 48. So I'm going to subtract again. I can't take 8 from 2. I make that be 12, and I make this be 4, and I have 4 left over. So the answer is 156 with a remainder of 4. So it says since there are blank sleeping bags left over, well, how many sleeping bags were left over? There were 4, right? blank cartons will be needed for all of them. Okay, so we had 156, but we have 4 left over. We can't just forget about those 4 sleeping bags. We're going to need to add an extra cart. Now, granted, we're not going to use all of that extra cart. We're still going to need to add an extra cart. So we have 156 plus that extra cart, which is going to be 157 cartons. Now, I'm only going to use 4 out of the 8 in that carton, but I still need it in order to make sure that I fulfilled my order. Okay, share and show. Interpret the remainder to solve. So this is the hard part. You really have to figure out what they want you to do with that remainder. Do I make it a fraction? Do I just have to add an extra carton or add something extra to my quotient to make that carton work, to make the remainder work? So let's see. Erica and Bradley want to take a hike to Big Cypress Trail. They will hike a total of 75 miles. If Erica and Bradley plan to hike for 12 days, how many miles will they hike each day? So first we're going to divide the quotient and find the remainder. Okay, so 12. Okay, 12 can't go into 7, but it can go into 75. Okay, about how many times can go into 75? Well, you can just try. Let's just say 12 times 7. 7 times 2 is 14. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 1 is 8. 84. That's going to be too much. So let's try 12 times 6. 6 times 2 is 12. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 7 is 72. So 6 is going to work. So I have 72, because 12 times 6 is 72. I'm going to subtract. I'm going to get 3. So now I have 3 left over. So now I have to figure out, how am I going to use the quotient in this? Okay, well, what do they want to know? How many miles will they hike each day? Okay, well, they're going to hike 6 miles, right? Most of the days for 12 days. But then they're going to have this 3 left over, okay? So we have to figure out how we're going to do that. So let's write it in a fraction. When we write it in a fraction, we're going to say 6 and 3 over 12, okay? And then if I'm going to reduce that fraction, it's going to be 6 and, well, I know 3 can go into 3, and I know 3 can go into 12. So 3 goes into 3 1 time, 3 goes into 12 4 times. So the answer is they're going to do 6 1/4 mile for the 12 days. Okay, so in this particular interpretation, I need to make it a fraction. When you do a fraction, you take the remainder and you put it. All right, so let's look at the next one now. What if Erica and Bradley want to take a hike 14 miles a day? How many days will they hike exactly 14 miles? So now you're going to just take the problem, and you're going to, instead of 12 here, you're going to put a 14. So let me clear it. Okay, so now instead of 12, I'm going to have 14 here. Okay, so this is going to be a 4, 14. 14 goes into 75. So let's see, 14 times, let's just say 6. 14 times 6, 6 times 4 is 24. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 2 is 8. Too much again. So let's try 14 times 5. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 2 is 7. So it looks like I'm going to do 5, and I've got 70. So now I've got a 5 remainder. Okay, so again, now it says how many, on this particular problem, it's saying how many days will they hike exactly 14 miles? Well, exactly 14 miles is going to be 5 days. They're going to have one day that they're going to have to do 5 miles, right? Or 5 more, but 5 days they're going to do exactly 14 miles, and they're going to have 5 miles left over. So the answer to that is going to be 5 days. Okay, and if you were to ask the question, how many days would it take them to finish the trip, you'd have to say 6 days. Because on 5 of the days, they're going to go 14 miles, and on that 6th day, they're going to do an additional 5 left over, right? So they're going to do 14 miles on 5 of the days, and then that last day, they would do 5 miles. So let's look at number 3. Number 3 says, Dylan's hiking club is planning to stay overnight at a camping lodge. Each large room can hold 15 hikers. There are 154 hikers. How many rooms will they need? In this particular case, we're going to need to look at that remainder, because if you've got rooms for 15 hikers, right, and then you've got some leftover people, you're not going to let them sleep outside. You're going to need to add an extra cabin, right? So looking at the remainders, you're going to really have to think about what they're asking and does it make sense. So let's go ahead and do it. So I've got 15 going into 154. Okay, 15 goes into 15 one time. I get 15. I subtract, I get nothing. I bring down my 4. Well, 15 can't go into 4, so I'm going to put a 0 there, and I'm going to have a remainder of 4. So I'm going to have 10 cabins with 15 people, but I still have 4 people left over. So I'm going to need 11 rooms, okay? 10 of those rooms are going to have 15 people in it, but one of the rooms is going to have 4 left over. So I'm going to need 11 rooms altogether because you can't just leave them out in the cold, right? All right, today you don't have very many on your own problems, but I really want you guys to think about them when you're doing them. Okay, this one says, how many cookies did each student eat? Okay, can you break a cookie in half? Could you make a fraction out of a cookie? Just food for thought. On this one, it says, how many cabins are full if 28 campers are in each one? This one, they just want to know how many cabins are full. So are we looking at the remainder? Yes. So on this one, it says, all of the buses are full except one. How many students will be in that bus that is not full? So when you're dividing this, how many are in the not full bus? And how, let's think about the remainder and what the remainder means. On this last one, it says, she says a piece, Shelley is going to divide 36-inch piece of ribbon into 5 equal pieces. She says each piece will be 7 inches long. Okay, so what is the error here? So go ahead and divide it. Figure out what the error is here on this one. Work with a partner on these 4. I highly suggest you do that. If you don't want to work on a partner, that's fine. I'll also be on the floor. You do have the backside, problem number 8, 9, and 10. Those ones are going to be a little bit easier. We're going to do 2 math lessons today. So when you're finished with this one, we're going to move on to the next one, all right? Thanks.